everyone, it's Morgan again. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to take you on a journey as I try to find the next Nabokov. So I've often joked that this is a Nabokov stan account, and it kind of is, but I also want to talk about other people I've read, other authors, and share more aspects of my reading life. So that's what we're going to do in this video. What I'm going to talk about in this video is my attempt to find more Nabokov-like authors and Nabokovian books, because I love Vladimir Nabokov and I have finished all of his novels. I finished all of his major works. So now I need that Nabokov fix and I want new content, but there's no more to be had because Nabokov is dead and I've read everything of his. So now I just have to go further afield and find people who are inspired by Nabokov or whose language and style is similar to Nabokov. And I want to share that with you today. So there are 5 authors and 5 of their books that I'm going to be talking about in this video. And then at the end, I'm going to have a little meta discussion about what I learned, my takeaways from the search for the next Nabokov. The first book I'm going to talk about is Evelyn Waugh's Brideshead Revisited. Evelyn Waugh is a giant of 20th century prose. His prose has been compared to Nabokov's, and I agree, it is similar. He was writing around the same time as Nabokov, and in fact, his life and Vladimir Nabokov's life are kind of coterminous with each other. They were born just within a couple of years of each other, and so they grew up in Europe in the 19-teens and 20s, came of age in that period of transition between the old Europe, pre-World War I, and the new Europe, which is the time between the wars, and then World War II, which changed everything. So their point of view just on the world is very similar. And I also have to say that Waugh is British. He's an English writer. And Nabokov, for the first 40 years of his life, lived in Europe, and he went to school in Cambridge, and he has a very transatlantic flavor in his writings in English, and I think he owes a lot to essentially English literature, the English tradition of fiction and writing. So their prose styles are comparable. I think out of all the authors that I'm going to talk about in this video, Evelyn Waugh's prose style is the most similar to Nabokov, and also kind of my favorite just because it's so lively and colorful. He uses vocabulary in very interesting ways. He's very playful with his metaphors and his sentences. As far as prose style goes, which is the thing that really carries me through a book if there's not anything else interesting going on in the plot at that moment, Waugh is great. He's very readable, and I'm trying to read more by Waugh right now. The subject matter of Brideshead Revisited is also very Nabokovian. This is the story of Charles Ryder, a guy looking back in middle age, post-World War II, at his formative years in college, in university, in England, in the interwar years, which is kind of like a halcyon time that has perished completely because of World War II. You can tell how this is pretty Nabokovian, the concept of having lost something in your past, intense nostalgia for that lost memory, a reliving of it, and then a kind of realization that you can never really go back, or the memory is not the same, or maybe the reality is not the same. All of that is thematically in Brideshead Revisited, and I love it for that. The second book that I'm going to be talking about is another wholehearted recommendation from me, 5 stars. It's The Leopard by Guiseppe Tomasi de Lampedusa. Now this is an Italian work. It's translated from Italian, and it is extremely famous in Italy. It was the best-selling Italian novel of the 20th century, and it is written by an author who is very similar, biographically speaking, to Nabokov. Similar to how Waugh is a contemporary of Nabokov, so is Lampedusa. And additionally, Lampedusa is an aristocrat, just like Nabokov was in Old Russia. Lampedusa is the last of a line of Sicilian noblemen, hereditary nobility, and he's writing The Leopard from the point of view of a Sicilian aristocrat from the time of the Risorgimento, which is around 1860, the time when the Kingdom of Italy came into being, the unification of much of Italy. I must praise the translation here. I did not know that translation could get this good. I believe there's only one English translation of The Leopard, so if you pick this up, you will experience this amazing translation. The prose is super lush and it flows so well. The sentences and the sequence of the words, just like it's mellifluous, it flows very well. I don't know if that's a quality of Lampedusa's writing or of the translator, but either way, it's just phenomenal. I didn't know that you could get a translation that was of this high quality, so I must recommend it for just the prose. And thematically, too, it's very similar to what I think Nabokov does for the events of the 20th century that happened during his own life. Lampedusa does that for the Risorgimento and the time of the Italian unification for the protagonist of The Leopard. By which I mean that he takes events that are very historical and that are turning points for society, and he drills down into the specifics of a single character or a single set of fictional events. So he takes something that you could generalize or oversimplify, and he chooses not to. He chooses to be very specific about it, which avoids the tendency, I think, of works that address contemporary topics to verge into polemicism or didacticism or social commentary. Because The Leopard is so specific, you can appreciate it as a universal work of art that is kind of for all time, rather than just for a specific readership at a specific point in time. So we had two bangers. I loved Evelyn Waugh's Brideshead Revisited. I loved Lampedusa's The Leopard. We gotta talk about some duds here. And the first dud, really, for me is Italo Calvino's If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. This is a favorite of many people in the book space, so I know I'm kind of braving the fire for this, but I really didn't like this book, really. So let me talk about first why it's similar to Nabokov, at least on the surface, and why it fails, I think. So If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, it's a very famous meta-textual or meta-fictional book, clearly riffing off of Pale Fire. I think Italo Calvino even says that he was deeply inspired by Nabokov subsequently to writing this book. The concept here is that you, the main character, you, the reader, are trying to read a book, but you get interrupted. And every time you get interrupted, you have to read a different book. So you get the first chapters of 10 different novels, 10 different works of fiction in If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. And then in between each of those 10 diegetic in-universe texts, you get this overarching narrative of a reader trying to read a book. So I don't think I have to belabor the similarities to Pale Fire. The act of reading, the act of interpreting and trying to read is a theme of If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, and it is also the theme that Nabokov tackles in Pale Fire, with the reader there kind of misinterpreting or over-interpreting the diegetic text. The reason why it fails, in my opinion, here is because in Pale Fire, that diegetic text was very good on its own. It stood up as a complete work on its own. You know, the play within the play, all of it gets told within Pale Fire. But in If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, you don't get a complete work within a work. You get 10 fragments, essentially, and each fragment, well, it doesn't end, it's fragmentary. So when I was reading this book, I was like dreading getting to each new start of a novel, of a in-universe novel, because I knew that it was going to break off and that nobody was going to reference it after it was over. We as readers still need to read that diegetic text, so that diegetic text better be interesting and it better be quality. It better make me want to pick up this book. And just because it happens so often, like 10 times, I got the picture after the first couple times, and I felt the urge to like skip all of the in-universe novels and just read the overarching narrative of the reader trying to read something, because I knew that that was a story that was going to get a conclusion, an ending, and everything else in here was not. So I wasn't really invested as I was reading any of the in-universe texts. This is the same issue, the issue that the endogenous texts just aren't very good or aren't very compelling on their own, that plagues the J.J. Abrams kind of work of art that is, it takes the shape of a book called The Ship of Theseus. If you're familiar with this work, you'll understand how these are basically like cut from the same Pale Fire inspired cloth, where this is like an in-universe book with lots of notes in the margin and ephemera that are included in the book. And the whole thing is supposed to tell a metatextual story. But as with If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, The Ship of Theseus is not a great novel. It's just not a great like work of art on its own. So you're like kind of tempted to skip the text and only read the meta text. So you're not really getting like the full picture of things, whereas I think Pale Fire does effectively blend those two by making the text itself much stronger. Okay, so let's move on to the fourth book and author I'm going to talk about, which is John Banville. John Banville is the first author that's still alive, at least as of now, in this video, and I picked Ancient Light, one of his more recent published books. Banville is a very prolific author. He's written under his own name and under kind of nom de plume for his detective novels. And I think he often gets called the next Nabokov in like the New York Times Review of Books or, you know, various literary periodicals that are just floating around these days. I've heard that term applied to Banville a lot. So I felt the need to just like do my due diligence and read him. And I think I chose a good one to start with. Ancient Light is on its surface very Nabokovian in subject matter. Ancient Light is about a relatively old man who is reflecting on his youthful love affair with his best friend's mom. So this is the story of a 14 or 15-year-old boy who has an affair with a 30-something, 35 or so year old woman, a mature woman who's the mom of one of his friends. So it's already got like Lolita vibes, basically. It's just Lolita in reverse, where instead of the underage party being a girl, it's a boy. And instead of like this unwilling nature of you know, the seduction, the abuse that is in Lolita, you get a very willing participant, which is this 15-year-old boy, the narrator of Ancient Light. So we have this pedophilia Nabokovian theme going on, and we also have, as this narrator is recalling his memories of this youthful affair, we also have the subjectivity of one's memory coming up. The theme of the fallibility of memory and how memory changes over time and how that memory doesn't necessarily reflect reality is something that comes up a lot in Ancient Light. The ancient light of the title actually refers to the light of stars that shine to us, you know, as we see them on Earth, but they're actually the light that was produced from that star billions of light years before today. And we are just seeing, you know, the light that shines from that object that may actually be completely dead and gone or just like changed beyond recognition. It's a very poetic metaphor that Banville uses here, and I gotta admit, it's very readable. There's nothing particularly difficult about it, but at the same time, that is also what makes the book a little bit forgettable, I think. It's just fine. Like, I don't think the prose is that amazing. It's not blowing me away on every page. There are moments of beauty where I perked up and was like, wow, this language is very good, or this is a very thoughtful point here. But then there are also vast stretches of silence where like not much is going on. Like there's not even that much like going on internally, perhaps, in the narration. And so I felt like I was kind of just coasting along, waiting for something to take me out of a baseline level of boredom that I experienced while reading this book. So Banville, like, maybe the next Nabokov? I don't know. I mean, I've only read Ancient Light, but I wouldn't say that his prose style blew me away, and that I think is like probably the #1 important criteria for enjoying a book, especially when there's not much going on. So yeah, kind of like a 3 out of 5 for me. Okay, so the last author that I'm going to talk about is Thomas Pynchon. He is a cult darling. You can find a lot of videos on BookTube already going into how to read Thomas Pynchon or like reviews of his individual novels. He is still alive. He's still producing books. He recently came out with a new book. You may have seen reviews of it. So I'm not going to belabor my introduction of him. But I wanted to dip my toes into Pynchon, so I started where a lot of people start, which is with The Crying of Lot 49. The premise here is super promising. You have a woman who has been appointed an executor of the will of someone that she lost contact with many years ago, an ex-boyfriend, and so she has to travel to a new place and meet new people in a sort of detective story where she tries to figure out what to do with this will and this estate that she is now responsible for. This already sounds pretty Nabokovian. It sounds like the premise of The Real Life of Sebastian Knight, which is about a guy kind of picking up the pieces of the life of someone who has already died. But Pynchon takes it in a different direction because you pretty quickly realize that the focus is not on this ex-boyfriend himself, but on this secret underground society or conspiracy theory involving the male that this ex-boyfriend may have been a part of. So the main character of The Crying of Lot 49 slowly starts to pick up on the insignia of this secret society, and once she's turned on to it, she begins to see signs and symbols of this secret conspiracy everywhere she looks. And that feeling, that theme of seeing the hidden signs in the design of life is a very Nabokovian concept. It's a cornerstone of Nabokov's metaphysics, which shows up strongly in The Crying of Lot 49. Another plus about The Crying of Lot 49 is that Pynchon can clearly write a plot that moves. Unlike Banville, where there are like vast stretches of silence, something's always going on in The Crying of Lot 49. There are changes of scenery, changes of time and place. There are inset stories. There are pullbacks to see the entirety of the narrative. So I think that in terms of like moving the plot along, Pynchon can clearly do that. And just because of the number of different scenes and number of different characters that are introduced in Pynchon's work, it kind of reads like a grown-up boy's adventure story where you just are like scrambling around and the main character is finding out clues and maybe it all leads somewhere and you're kind of just like hoping that it does. I also have to note that there are some explicit references to Nabokov in The Crying of Lot 49, especially to Lolita. The name Humbert Humbert is name dropped, and then the word nymphette is used multiple times. So you can clearly see like at least the influence of Lolita in this book. Overall, I did like the read, the experience of this book, but I think the one aspect in which it differs from Nabokov is like the aspect that I didn't like about it, which is that it is a very unconventional narrative structure. Nabokov is a traditionalist. He's a conventionalist. He shares a lot of similarities with like writers of the 19th century, more so, I think, than the postmodernists, which this book is clearly in the tradition of. And this is a slight spoiler, but I gotta address it. Pynchon doesn't tie up his loose ends. He doesn't give you like an answer in The Crying of Lot 49. I mean, he does bring the narrative to an end at a place that I think makes sense, and you could be quite satisfied with the place that this book ends. But I think in terms of conventional narrative or a old-fashioned writer, they would probably consider this book incomplete because it doesn't actually drill down to the answer or the import of that secret underground society. You find out a good amount about this secret society, but does it tie back to the events of the protagonist here? Is there like a closing or a sense of closure to the events of the protagonist here? I don't know if it really has that, and I don't think it does. I think in that sense, it's very un-Nabokovian, because Nabokov would never not deliver the goods at the end of a storyline. He wants to follow through with that punchline, and this book does not follow through. So I've talked about 5 writers and 5 books which are similar to Nabokov in certain ways and then different from Nabokov in certain other ways. And what I've learned from this journey of trying to find the next Nabokov is that you basically can't. I basically can't find the next Nabokov or a substitute for Nabokov, because each individual artist, every great writer, has their own unique take, own unique voice and perspective on their writing, on art, on whatever it is that they're doing. And so it's not possible to just substitute a great writer for anyone else. Nabokov was one of a kind. He was expressing his own views. If another artist has like the same view as Nabokov, he's gonna try to find a new twist on it, something different that makes it his own. And he wouldn't be a great writer if he just copied the great masters of the past. That's not how innovation happens. That's not how great artists make a name for themselves. So this whole attempt to find the next Nabokov, it was kind of futile. I could not find someone who was exactly similar to Nabokov, but it's also caused me to appreciate that every artist, every great writer needs to be taken on their own terms. And what distinguishes Nabokov is only him. Like, there's not going to be anyone who writes like him that I can use as a substitute for him. There's no fungibility in terms of artists. And that ties into the second kind of takeaway from this journey, which is I've learned that my fondness and my interest in Vladimir Nabokov is pretty special. I've not found this level of special interest and special liking for any other author that I've read, which means that whatever this connection is I have with Vladimir Nabokov, it's unique, it's special, and I need to nurture it. And so my lesson for myself and my advice to you is that whatever you're interested in, if you find that you have a special level of connection to something, no matter what it is, it could be an author, it could be an activity, it could be something about your job or whatever sparks your passion and like enlivens your mind, cling to that and nurture that, because that's really the spice of life. Being really interested in something and caring strongly about something, that's what this whole thing is about. And by this whole thing, I mean life. I, for my part, am going to continue to read the scraps, the bottom of the barrel of Vladimir Nabokov that I know exist. And I'm also going to try to find other writers who are described as similar to Nabokov. There are a few that immediately come to mind that I haven't yet read, including Mary Gateskill and Arthur Phillips and Martin Amis. So I'm gonna dip my toes into these other people but I'm also gonna just stew in my fandom for Vladimir Nabokov because it's special. It's on a level not like anything else that I've experienced in my life, and I think that needs to be nurtured. No matter how embarrassing it is or if it makes me a weirdo or whatever, this is what it's all about. I'm gonna stay in it. Okay, thanks for watching this video. Let me know if you have any recommendations for Nabokov-like authors. And yeah, that's all from me. See you next time.